Welcome, dreamers, to the realm where time whispers its secrets. Tonight, we drift into a veil of shadow and silence, into a world cloaked in mystery, where cobblestone streets once echoed with footsteps, and then with silence, but of timeless contemplation. We journey not to relive the suffering, where the Black Death did not merely claim lives but rewrote the rhythm of the world, reshaped cities, redefined faith, and buried strange secrets beneath cloisters, candles, and cathedral stones. But to explore the echoes left behind, the forgotten whispers of a vanished rhythm, a hidden truth veiled in medieval mist. This is not a tale of terror, a pilgrimage through memory. So, before we embark on this journey through time's mysteries, if these ancient whispers resonate with your soul, let your presence be known through a gentle light, and join our circle of dreamers by subscribing to continue these nightly journeys into history's hidden realms. Share with us, fellow dreamers, from which corner of the world you're joining tonight's contemplation. Let the global community of history's mysteries connect across time zones as we drift together into the past. Close your eyes now. Inhale the scent of damp parchment and distant incense, and let the forgotten winds of the 14th century carry us through the veiled corridors of memory. Tonight, we begin with a mystery. Not the plague itself, but the forgotten clues it left behind. Let us begin. Long before the cries echoed through the winding alleys of Florence and the bell towers of Ghent rang out without pause, there was silence. Not the silence of sleep, but the breathless hush of something not yet understood. The kind of quiet that lingers before the first drop of rain. The world, in the early years of the 14th century, was shifting, but it did not yet know why. The air smelled of hearth smoke and bread yeast. Markets hummed with life. In the monasteries, monks whispered chants that rose with the morning mists. In fields, peasants bent to the rhythm of the seasons, tilling and sowing by the phases of the moon. Life was slow, predictable, and tethered to the divine and the earth. But across the sea, where ships from the east danced upon the waters like beetles on glass, something ancient stirred. A whisper from the Silk Road, a shadow from the steppes. There, Genoese merchants held fast behind their walls, as the Mongol army camped outside began to fall to a mysterious illness. The tale, preserved in half-crumbled parchments, speaks of bodies hurled over city walls, catapults launching the dead like curses. Whether truth or myth, something passed from the steppe to the sea, a secret carried by fur and flea and wind. It began far away, in the empire of the Mongols, where trade moved like blood through the veins of empires. There, in the great stone cities of Central Asia, a strange fever was spoken of in caravans and among healers. People died quickly, with dark blooms upon their skin. But such stories at first were distant like thunder in the mountains. Yet, the thunder rolled closer. In the year 1346, the silence began to fracture. A siege at the port of Cafanal, known as Feodosia, marked a strange beginning. The pestilence, a reckoning, a mirror held up to the soul of civilization. The corruption, the wrath, names born of fear and faith, of dreams gone quiet and saints gone silent. The Genoese fled, and they carried the whisper with them. As their ships sailed west, to Constantinople, to Messina, to Venice, and beyond, they brought more than silken stories. And as the sickness spread, so too did confusion. They brought the silence, but that silence was about to end. In the narrow homes of the Venetian lagoon, candles began to burn late into the night. Something was wrong. People began to fall ill. No one yet knew its name. No one understood its shape. Strange patterns, forgotten signs, things that did not fit the stories we were later told. But they felt it like cold fingers on the back of the neck. As the weeks passed, the silence turned brittle, a hush at first, then murmurs, then weeping. And still, no one called it plague. Not yet. They called it other things. For in the medieval world, there was no clear line between the spiritual and the physical. Illness was more than disease, it was a message. Unaware that history, in its quiet way, is already changing shape. Priests scoured scripture. Herbalists ground roots into bitter teas. Astrologers looked to the heavens and charted the strange alignments of stars and planets. And in the streets, the whispers grew louder. Markets began to empty. Church bells rang not for weddings or feast days, but for souls. And the silence that once blanketed the land became something else entirely. It became a shadow. It stretched across fields, over moats, through abbey doors, and into the minds of kings and commoners alike. Yet hidden within that silence were secrets. This was no simple tale of rats and ships. It was older, deeper, and more elusive. And so, we begin not with fear, but with stillness, with the calm that comes before a world begins to change. With a sigh of wind that whispers through the thatched roof of a cottage in the countryside of England, where a shepherd glances toward the horizon. Far from the bustling cities and coastal ports, there were places wrapped in silence, not born of fear, but of devotion. But by the tolling of bells and the soft rustle of sandals on flagstone, the cloisters, to silence, to copying sacred texts with ink so thick it smelled of the earth, to preserving knowledge against the hunger of time. stone-ringed sanctuaries where the rhythm of the hours was measured not by trade or town criers. Within these monastic walls, men and women gave their lives to contemplation. Chants sung with a breath to shallow eyes that flickered not to the crucifix but to the windows, as if something might appear from beyond. And yet, even here, something was stirring. Or cloaked figures walking between the rows of graves long before the bells tolled for their first victims, not from sin or sound, but from a formless unease, a trembling in the soul. Faces darkening. Children do not wake. The bells rang thinner, sometimes not at all, but the watchers of the world, the ones who recorded its breathings and preserved its memory, had begun to notice its shadows creeping into even their most sacred spaces. It began, subtler pages left half-finished, bore the markings of a scribe who had broken pattern. Instead of the expected Latin chant, he had written a strange meditation. Monks who once slept soundly in narrow cells began to wake in the depths of night. Who then may hide from what walks without feet or breath? It was not capiti nor meant for others to read. Into hermitage, into places so remote that even history forgets their names. It was a confession, a fear turned into ink, a rhythm of coming change that only those attuned to silence could truly hear, sealed in the stillness of stone. Its presence was first recorded not as a storm but as a shadow that stretched longer each dusk. It was in the great library of the Abbey of St. Gall, where one of the earliest records was quietly noted, words scrawled in a margin beside a psalm. Not a headline, not a proclamation, but a whisper. Strangers ill in the village below. The ink trembled on the page. The Black Death had not yet been named. Some monks, it is said, saw visions. In their candlelit vigils, they claimed to glimpse dark birds circling low over the land. One record, found centuries later beneath a collapsed wall in a monastery near Wood. If the air carries death, and the wind knows its name, such poetry was not common in these ledgers. For, in these cloisters, time moved differently. The world beyond might erupt with fear and flame, but within these walls, the pace remained until the silence grew too loud to ignore. One by one, the abbeys began to shut their gates, not in defiance, but in quiet retreat. The sacred gardens were no longer tended. And then, a strange thing occurred. Some of the monks vanished. No bodies were found, no notes left behind, just empty robes folded near fountains, or books open to pages of lamentation. The chroniclers would later suggest they had fled. But where does a man devoted to silence flee? Perhaps, some say, they went inward, into deeper prayer. And still others believe they felt something in the earth, a pulse, slow and deep, as if the land itself whispered a warning. The Black Death did not arrive with horns and banners. It slipped between shutters. It flowed under doors. It crept into ink and breath and thought. And in the cloisters, where men had long prepared to meet eternity, a hidden secret now buried in the folds of illuminated manuscripts, in the margins, in the corners where fear leaves its truest mark. On the edge of the known world, where mountains kiss the sea and churches rise like white teeth above the cliffs, there lies a port once rich with salt, silk, and stories. Messina, the Sicilian harbor that opened its arms to trade, to pilgrims, to wandering minstrels, and unwittingly to death. It was here, on a bright morning in October of 1347, that a fleet of 12 ships glided into the bay. Their sails hung limp, and their flags offered no greeting. Fishermen ceased mending nets. Something was wrong. Silent, they floated like ghosts. The people watched from the shore. Dock workers stood still with ropes coiled in their hands. Those who approached the ships were met not with orders or laughter or greetings in Genoese, but with the scent of rot and something colder than the sea. Many aboard were already gone. Those who still breathed were pale, delirious, their bodies marked with black swellings, buboes like bruises, formed from within. No one yet called it plague, but within hours of the ship's arrival, the city began to change. The markets fell quiet. Doors closed early, candles burned longer, and whispers began to thicken like smoke. What had arrived? A punishment, told of lights dancing above the ships the night before they docked. But the memory of strange lights lingered in tales, told by grandmothers in Sicilian villages long after the last bell tolled. Floating flames, blue and green, hovering like will-o'-the-wisps, silent and slow. No swelling. He carried herbs bound in silk and sang to the dying in a tongue unknown to any priest or scholar. He vanished the day after the last ship was burned in the harbor. A foreign curse. Processions were held. The Virgin was prayed to beneath frescoes that seemed to weep in the damp. Others, a remnant of some forgotten magic. But the sickness spread, not just through breath or blood, but through fear. A deeper contagion, or something older, something that did not come from men at all. In the cathedral, incense was lit. And yet, Messina's story holds stranger fragment species that do not always appear in history's grand tale. An old sailor's journal, discovered centuries later in a salt-stained chest buried in a crypt beneath Palermo. No one dared speak of such visions publicly, for the church was vigilant. and superstition danced close to heresy. Another tale speaks of a boy who walked among the sick, untouched. He bore no sign of fear. No one knew his name. No grave was dug for him. But with 12 ships in a harbor that did not yet know how to say goodbye. A shadow that unmade memory. Some said he was an angel. Messina, once alive with the laughter of markets and the creak of merchant carts, became a city of echoes. Doors barred, windows shuttered, families disappeared, and all the while, the sea lapped the stones with an indifferent rhythm, as if whispering, "This has happened before." And somewhere deep in the hills, past the olive groves and lavender fields, the shepherds and monks looked down and saw the smoke rising. But they did not descend, for something had awakened in Messina, and through its narrow lanes and cloistered chapels, the Black Death walked not as a beast, but as a silence that unmade sound. Thus did the veil begin to fall across Europe, not with war, not with prophecy. As the darkness spread inland, winding through valleys and scaling mountains, the heavens above began to shimmer with an unfamiliar glow. One can still find the worn diagrams, circles within circles, stars marked with wax seals, reflections of earthly affairs. And so, the sky's changes were not dismissed as accidents of atmosphere or ice. They were portents, margins filled with anxious anxiety. It was the winter of 1347 when sky watchers in Prague, Nuremberg, and Avignon recorded strange luminescence. Not comets, those familiar harbingers of misfortune, but orbs of pale silver. A Benedictine scribe named Matthew described one such night. They hovered, they watched. It felt not like the gaze of Allah, but of something older, adrift among the constellations, refusing to follow the paths known to scholars and monks alike, who claimed to dream the same dream under those stars. A cloaked figure walking backward through a wheat field, leaving behind no footprints, only dead stalks. In the manuscripts of the Celestia Chamber in Mainz, Norse fishermen spoke of a night when the northern lights turned deep violet, and the sea below stilled as if listening. They speak of hysteria, of hallucinations, of molten bread or fever dreams, a silence so total that even the gulls refused to cry. A new wandering light. One entry reads, "Not Saturn, not Mars, it pulses as if alive." To the medieval mind, the heavens were not just above, they were messages, warnings. The bells simply told once, and then no more. Or perhaps remind that history is not just made of names and dates, but of mysteries. In a small monastery nestled near the River Rhine, the stars did not blink as they once did. He goes on to tell of a group of pilgrims. What are we to make of such things? The stars burned above, watching, waiting, whispering their own ancient language. In another part of Europe near the fjords of Bergen, and it was not just the stars. Animals changed. Birds that once nested in eaves abandoned towns altogether. Horses refused to cross certain thresholds, standing stubborn in the face of invisible walls. Cats vanished by the dozens. In an abbey near Ghent, the bell ringer recorded a night when the chimes rang themselves. No hand pulled the ropes, no wind stirred the air. Historians may scoff, but the dreamers among us, the watchers and whisperers, know better. For every era of great change is accompanied by a thinning of the veil, a lifting of the ordinary, a glimpse, however brief, into the fabric beneath. The stars, perhaps, were not warning of death, but mourning it, weeping light into the sky for the souls not yet lost but already forgotten. It is in these moments, beneath unfamiliar skies, that we are reminded how small our certainties truly are, of dances in the heavens, of shadows on the hills, of things seen not with the eyes, but with the part of the soul that listens. And as the Black Death wound its way deeper into the heart of Europe, a language few remembered, and fewer dared to answer, the countryside of France, once laced with pilgrim songs and the creak of merchant carts, began to quiet. Not all at once, but gradually, like a candle burning low, casting longer shadows before its final flicker. From the vineyards of Bordeaux to the lavender fields near Arles, the familiar rhythms of rural life slowed. Fields were left unharvested, wells sat still. The church doors, once open to the wind, began to groan on their hinges, rarely opened, rarely shut. And on the roads, once crowded with traders and friars, only the wind moved freely. They called them Leschgemensvidis, the hollow roads. At first, they were unsettling in their emptiness, but soon they became something else entirely. But because something along the path shifted, they became thresholds. There are tales spoken only in certain valleys of travelers who entered these hollow roads and never returned, not because of illness or robbery. One such story came from a letter penned by a sister, now kept in a glass case in the quiet library of Tours. Circles with 3 points, arcs like he wrote of a small group who left the abbey to bring food to an ailing village. They took the familiar trail through the pines. Bernard watched them go. They were never seen again. It grew over with moss and bramble, as if the land itself had reclaimed what it had once lent. No cart, no bot, no wheel ruts in the dirt, just silence. Weeks later, the same road was walked again, and near a bend in the trees, strange symbols were found painted in ash on the stones. They sang not hymns, but dirges in forgotten tongues. Songs that made even the crows fall still on the fence posts. No one knew their meaning. Pale eyes bright with what she called starlight. He asked no questions, spoke no words. A change in the air, the soil, the very stones beneath the feet, but left behind a bundle of dried herbs she had never seen before. No one dared erase them. In time, the road was avoided. Elsewhere, a widow from Avignon spoke of a man she met walking the road near her vineyard. She burned them that night and dreamed of her late husband, smiling, unburdened. The next morning, her fever was gone. She tried to find the man again. She never did. In these times, when death rode in silence and breath, even the roads held secrets. Some pilgrims walked barefoot through the villages, covered in ash, their bodies bent in penance. No one stopped them. No one dared. Because the Black Death was more than a disease. It was a presence, a whisper on every wind. And the hollow roads of France carried not just travelers, but memory, a memory that lives even now in the cracked stones of forgotten chapels and in the roots that break through once paved paths. If you walk those roads today, some say you may still feel it. A pause, a stillness, waiting in somewhere in the wind, a voice that is not quite wind at all, but something older, always listening. Among the many trades that shaped medieval Europe, few were as sacred and secretive as the bell. These were the artisans who worked in fire and shadow, casting bells not merely of bronze, but of intention. For, in the medieval mind, bells were more than instruments. They were guardians, wards against evil. Their voices echoed through valley and village alike, calling to prayer, to safety, to mourning. But in the wake of the Black Death, a strange silence began to fall not only over the people, but over the towers themselves. There is mention of the sudden absence of entire guilds of bell. One moment, they were working their alchemy in smoke-stained sheds at the city's edge. The next, their forges lay cold, their molds untouched, their aprons folded neatly near the hearthstones. Bells, once the breath of a town, fell still, and so did the bell. In records kept in the archives of Cologne, no signs of struggle, no signs of illness, only absence. In the town of Limoges, a tower was left half-built, its scaffolding frozen in time, as if the workers had vanished mid. The bell cast but not yet blessed, sat in the yard, turned slightly on its side, and from within it, some claimed, came a low hum, not a sound made by wind or touch, but something like a resonance without cause, but had been called, chosen. Inside it, she found a small bundle of rosemary and iron filings, things never placed there by her sisters, drawn to something they had always sensed behind the veil of their craft, where at certain hours, even in modern time, people claimed to hear a faint tolling bell. No bell has swung in generations, that they had built their own towers of silence, far from the grasp of man, waiting, perhaps, for the world to find its voice again. A few weeks later, the grass beneath the bell withered in a perfect ring. The tower was never completed. The townspeople refused to approach it. Stories spread that the bell founders had not fled. Some said they heard voices in the molten bronze. Others whispered the bells, once forged, remembered every soul they rang for. And when too many names went unspoken, the bells wept. A nun in the countryside near Lyon kept a diary during those years. In one entry, she described a night where all the bells in her region rang at once midnight, with no hands on ropes, no wind through belfries, just sound. And then silence. The next morning, a bell in her own chapel had cracked down its center. Some monks believed the bell founders had vanished into the mountains. And still today, there are villages where the bell towers remain empty, where the bells were never replaced. It is not just the dead who vanish in great plagues. Sometimes, it is the guardians, the keepers of rhythm, the ones who knew how to sing to the sky. And in their silence, they left behind more than hollow towers. They left questions. Who truly listens when a bell is rung, and who answers when its voice goes quiet? Far to the east, where the Vltava River winds through the mist-veiled hills and stone towers lean over its waters, the city of Prague waited in stillness. Prague, old, even then, was a city of alchemists, scholars, and shadows, a place where knowledge lived not just in books, but in symbols, carved into lintels, inked beneath robes. It shimmered beneath doorways and cloaked itself in fog, hidden in glass windows that bled golden light. Here people watched, they observed, they wrote. When the pestilence came, it did not knock. They bore not the faces of birds but of angels, demons, saints, and stars. Eyes ringed in gold leaf, mouths sewn shut with silk thread, designs borrowed from dreams and visions seen during fevered nights. But Prague was not quick to panic. With their long-beaked visages and medicinal herbs, and they masked. It began not with the plague doctors of later centuries. No, the first masks of Prague were something else entirely, painted by hand, carved of alder wood or molded from hardened linen. They were not worn for protection. They were worn to be unseen, as if by hiding one's face behind the divine or the grotesque. The pestilence might pass by, mistaking soul for shadow. In a small ledger found in the attic of the Clement, a librarian recorded a series of sightings figures in elaborate robes. He found not a person beneath, but another mask. Others insist they were practical symbols of quarantine, signs to mark the ill from the healthy, painted with a tear, standing motionless at street corners long after midnight, always masked, always silent. Their spirit would not wander, but remain, waiting, patient, veiled, preserved. They did not speak, did not move when approached, and when one man dared to remove the mask of such a figure, the tale was dismissed, of course. It is said that masked figures can still be glimpsed among the statues, watching with patience, as fear, as myth, but a paused breath. A fresco remains faded and nearly erased by time, depicting a congregation of masked worshippers, kneeling beneath an empty cross. None are named, none show faces. But the masks spread. Artisans began crafting them in secret. It became known that if one died wearing a mask death was not a final death. In one hidden chapel near the castle, only their masks remain faces of stars, flames, moonlight, and beasts of the forest. They are not frightening. They are reverent, a plea, perhaps, to be remembered by something greater than time. Some scholars believe the masks were Prague's way of reshaping fear into art. But there are those who whisper that the masks held power, that certain masks, if worn during the right hour of the night, while a particular star rose above the city spires, could offer visions. Of what? No one agreed. Some said they saw futures where the streets bloomed again with music. Others claimed to see past lives, walking hand in hand with the present. And a few, only a few, returned with silence in their eyes and never spoke again. The masks of Prague have long since vanished, or so we are told. Yet in attics and cellars, beneath stones and behind false walls, they linger. And on nights when the fog returns to the Charles Bridge, and the lamps flicker with no wind, not haunting, simply remembering, for the plague did not erase all things. Some it transformed, some it veiled. And in Prague, the veil remains, in the northern reaches of the Holy Roman Empire, where salt-scented winds swept in from the Baltic Sea and merchant ships crowded the bustling harbors. The city of Lubeck flourished. Stone spires reached like fingers toward the gray skies. Streets wound like ribbons of cobble. This was a city of trade and treaties, of letters and known as the Queen of the Hanseatic League. Inns opened their doors but received no guests. The marketplaces were half filled with wary eyes and half-spoken rumors. Should they close the gates, turn away the foreign ships, pray harder? Bernie and Sensum suggested it was punishment. Others claimed it was simply bad wind, carried north from foreign lands. And then, one spring, a stillness fell. Not a loud calamity, but a hush, as though the tide itself had held its breath. Ships docked but did not unload. People spoke in lowered voices of the southern ports of Messina, of Genoa, of sickness, of Bodies, of something they couldn't see, but felt in their bones, like a storm coming through the ribs. But in the strangest place, the Council of Lubeck debated with candlelit fire. But while the city hesitated, a garden bloomed. Not in the squares, nor in the manor courtyards. Her dress untouched by time, her voice soft and clear, where every book ever lost was being copied anew by hands made of candle smoke. Her face veiled in silver, her footsteps leaving blossoms behind. Who lived near the chapel? Never by day, never under the sun. One night she rose to fetch water and saw pale blossoms glowing faintly in the moonlight, where no flowers had grown before. The graveyard of St. Ansgar's chapel. At night the first to notice was a washerwoman named Ilsa. They were unlike anything she had seen. Long-stemmed, silver-veined, petals shaped like teardrops. By morning, they were gone. She told no one. Others swore they heard faint humming when they leaned close. But over the coming nights, others noticed as well. Flowers blooming only under moonlight. Some said they smelled of salt and myrrh. Word spread quietly. And soon there were those who gathered by the edge of the chapel garden after dusk, not to mourn the dead but to witness what they began calling Dimet and Expellin, the midnight flowers. No one could explain them. No gardener claimed them. No seeds were found. But as the Black Death crept closer, these flowers continued to bloom, and with them came strange dreams. Ilsa, the washerwoman, dreamt of walking through the garden hand in hand with her grandmother, who had died decades before. A scribe from the council dreamed of a library beneath the earth. A young boy claimed he dreamed of the Virgin Mary planting seeds beneath the moon. People began to leave offerings in the garden. Candles, herbs, small scraps of parchment with prayers and songs. But when the plague finally reached Lubeck, the flowers stopped. No wilted remains. No fading scent. Simply gone, as though they had never been. St. Ansgar's chapel fell into disuse during the height of the sickness to Belcrack. The doors were barred. But years later, when the city breathed again and life returned to the docks and the squares, someone reopened the chapel garden, and they found, deep beneath the soil where the midnight flowers had bloomed, a buried circle of stones, etched with runes. Not Latin, not Greek. Something older, no one could read them. They remained there still, moss-covered and sunless, a mystery rooted in silence. Perhaps the Black Death did not come only to destroy. Perhaps in certain corners of the world it came to reveal, to lift the veil between breath and memory, between what is real and what is remembered. And in Lubeck it left behind no scripture, only a garden that blooms no more. In the sun-drenched plains of southern France, where vineyards curled like green serpents across the hills and the rain shimmered beneath cloudless skies, the city of Avignon stood proud, crowned by its palace. Rome had grown restless, fractured, and so the Vicar of Christ, clothed in white and shadow, had made his home by the rain, guarded by stone, and wrapped in incense and Latin prayers. In those years, the papacy itself had shifted here, but even holy ground offered no sanctuary from the tide that approached. It arrived first in the eyes of visitors fever-glossed distant, then in their breath shortened shallow, then in the streets. Within weeks, the plague moved from rumor to rhythm. Processions clogged the lanes, written on vellum so thin it bordered on translucent, folded in threes, always without a name, without a dress. And yet, they found their way to the right hands. White-robed penitents dragged iron across their backs, chanting litanies beneath a sky that had begun to burn a harsher gold. But behind the noise, behind the flame and fear, something quieter was taking place. Letters, strange letters. They arrived without heralds or seals. To the scribes in the papal court, to the scholars in the university cloisters, to the midwives and herbalists who whispered beneath the domes. They came with no explanation, but all bore the same signature. Some were filled with warnings, poetic descriptions of towns that would soon fall silent, always written days before it happened, long forgotten, boiling saffron beneath a waning moon, sleeping beneath willow bark, bathing feet in salted milk and juniper ash. A single inked symbol, a spiral, enclosed within a circle, pierced by a feather. But her song shall be heard. No one claimed author that places, like people, could remember, could mourn, could speak. No courier ever saw them delivered, and yet they arrived. Her stones weep, her fountains dream, and now, in sickness, she sings. Their contents vary. Others spoke of old remedies, a few contained prophecies, not in the grand sense, but in quiet things, messages meant for a future not yet, ready to read them in a last desperate attempt to ward off the air's corruption. The woman in red will not wake. At the hour of the second bell, light the southern candle. He will survive. Speak the name of the lost child into the well. He is, and in nearly every case, the details proved eerily true. In time, these letters became known as Les Murmurs, the Whispers. Some believed they were sent by angels, others by those who walked the plague's path, untouched seers, wanderers, relics of older orders. But one librarian, Sistow of the Carmelite house, believed otherwise. In her journal now, lost but quoted in fragments by later, she suggested the letters were the voices of the city itself. Avignon knows, she wrote. She has always known. As the Black Death claimed the lives of cardinals and peasants alike, the letters continued to arrive, even after the scribes stopped answering, even after the Pope himself retreated to a room surrounded by fire, his bed encircled by burning torches, and still the spiral came. Even now, beneath the foundations of the old papal palace, archivists whisper of a sealed chamber, a vault, locked with a mechanism no one can decipher. Within, they say, are hundreds of unopened whispers, letters untouched by time. Perhaps they contain nothing. Perhaps they are blank. Or perhaps they still hold secrets from a time when the world stood at the edge of breath and memory, when cities spoke and silence answered. In the heart of Tuscany, nestled among ochre hills and winding vineyards, lies Siena, city of painted saints and crimson flags, of towers that reach skyward and streets that spiral like the petals of a rose. Before the shadow, Siena was a city in ascension. Her people had built a cathedral that dared to rival Rome. Her palaces gleamed with marble and song. Her painters captured divine light with brush and gold. The city pulsed with pageantry and pride, but even pride could not keep out the wind, carrying dust from the south, then sharper, heavier, as if weighted with breath unspoken. And the wind came soft at first. When the pestilence reached Siena, it moved quickly, not just through bodies but through color. The frescoes faded, the banners fell limp. Even the bells, cast from the finest bronze, began to toll off key as though reluctant. And then, as in other cities, the silence crept in. But Siena, proud Siena, did not surrender easily. A council of builders, scholars, and mystics was gathered beneath the cathedral, not in defiance but in search of something. Beneath the city, a network of tunnels wound through ancient stone, the Botanian underground world carved long before the memory of most. Originally dug to channel water, they had become more than conduits. They were veins. They carried not just life, but whispers. And some said they remembered. There were stories, even then, of voices in the deep, not malevolent, not kind, simply echoing, as though the stones beneath Siena had absorbed every prayer, every cry, every name ever spoken in the dark. The council, driven by fear and wonder, sent a group into the Botanium with candles, quills, and sealed scrolls written in both Latin and a script older still. What they sought was unclear. A cure, a ritual, a conversation, not loud, not mournful, only two returned. And they refused to speak of what they saw. One, a stonecutter named Lucio, never touched his tools again. He lived out his days in the convent of St. Clara, carving nothing but simple circles into the dirt with his fingers. The other, a woman named Beatrice, wrote only one sentence before falling silent forever. The city remembers the first death and the last and the one yet to come. Shortly after, a strange phenomenon began. As if nature herself rose to complete what ambition could not. At twilight, certain alleys in Siena would fill with a sound low, harmonic, like a voice singing from beneath the street. Just there, present, as if Siena herself had begun to hum. Scholars dismissed it as wind, as water, as superstition, but children knew better. They would place their ears to the flagstones and smile. "She's telling stories again," they would say. Over time, the sound faded. The streets returned to quiet. The plague took its toll, and Siena never completed her cathedral. To this day, the unfinished nave stands open to the sky, vines curling along the pillars, but beneath the city, the puttini remain, still dry in places, still echoing, some claim. And on certain nights, when the moon leans low and the streets lie empty, one might feel it, a hum beneath the soles, a voice not heard by ears, but felt by the bones. Not a warning, not a lament, just memory, living, breathing, waiting, deep within the Carpathian foothills, where pine forests breathe mist and the stars lean low to listen. There stood once a village with no name, not because it had been forgotten, but because it was never spoken aloud. The villagers believed that to name a place was to fix it in time, to bind it to fate. And so they let the wind call it what it would. In this nameless village, far from any map or road, there stood a structure unlike any chapel, hall, or farmstead. The villagers called it simply the Place of Pages. It was a building without doors. Its walls were smooth stone, dark as winter water, veined with pale quartz that shimmered faintly in starlight. No windows broke its surface. No smoke rose from a chimney. And yet, the elders claimed it had been there longer than the forest, longer than the village itself. They said the building listened. And on certain nights it opened, a few coughs, a few fevers, but none of the devastation that blanketed the cities. The Black Death never reached this village in full. The people gave thanks, but quietly. They knew why. The stone wall facing north receded inward, folding like breath. A corridor of lightless warmth was revealed, and within, shelves, because the Place of Pages had spoken. One night, as the sky wept violet in silver shelves that did not end. Not grand, gilded shelves, but simple wooden ones, built from trees that no longer grew. The villagers entered not in fear, but in reverence. Some were filled with shapes, others with music pressed into the page like braille for the soul. Each person was permitted only once in a lifetime. Once inside, they found books not written in any known tongue, and some were mirrors, casting light on a child playing alone in a silent courtyard. Not of the face, images of cities they had never visited, names they had never heard, whispered softly in the air between pages, but of memory, of self. It was said that during the Black Death, those who entered saw things not from their own lives, but from the lives of others, of strangers far away. A baker's daughter saw herself walking through Florence, her hands wrapped in cloth, feeding the sick. An old man saw the moon rise over Avignon. A shepherd saw a plague doctor remove his mask and beneath. Not a face, but a field of stars. These were not dreams. They were remembrances, but not their own. The villagers believed the library was not a building, but a vessel, a memory keeper, a cradle for the world's forgotten breath. Each time one entered, they carried back something intangible, an image, a feeling, a name, and in return they left behind a memory of their own, not a written story, of songs and languages never taught, of bells tolling beneath the ocean, not a confession, but a truth, given freely to the shelves. And then, as suddenly as it had opened, the library would close. Its wall would return, smooth and cold, as if untouched. In the years that followed, none of the villagers succumbed to the plague, but their dreams grew rich and strange. They spoke of places they had never been. Some say the Place of Pages still stands, hidden now behind shifting trees and forgotten maps, weighed in not for scholars, not for kings, but for those who listen in silence and carry within them a question they cannot name. To the far west of medieval Europe, where the land gives way to the sea and the wind speaks in the voice of gulls, lies Galicia, land of green hills, stone churches, and paths worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. here where the stars of the Milky Way curved like a river of souls across the night sky. Pilgrims have long walked the ancient route to Santiago de the Camino. The path remained, even in times of plague, when cities faltered and hope thinned to a thread, though fewer walked it, and those who did were not always as they seemed. Speak of strange figures along the Camino during the darkest months of the plague. The chronicles of a hermit monk named Osorio, hidden in the margins of a leather-bound psalter now housed in a Benedictine archive. They were quiet pilgrims, always alone. No food, no emblems of saint or shrine, always barefoot, but in grey robes that shimmered faintly in moonlight, as if woven from mist, cloaked not in wool or sackcloth. They carried no staffs. The man or woman, it was unclear, paused beneath an ancient oak and placed their hand upon the trunk. The wind ceased, the birds fell silent, and then, without a word, the figure moved on. But always they walked west, always toward the sea, and wherever they passed, the air grew still. Who had been near death from fever, sitting up and weeping softly not from pain, but from a dream she could not remember. Osorio described watching one such figure from the window of his hermitage. Later, the oak's bark bore a spiral pattern scorched into its heartwood, blackened, but not burned. The villagers who lived near the pilgrim routes began to notice signs. Stone cans rearranged into circles by morning, holding a candle made of bone and beeswax. He did not speak, but pointed toward her mother's bed, cold and clear, for precisely 3 days, then stopped. Shallow bowls of salt appearing on windowsills, untouched by wind or rain. And on one occasion a stream that had run dry for generations began to flow again. In the village of Oship, a young girl claimed one of the pilgrims came to her in a dream the next morning. The girl awoke to find her mother. Even the church hesitated to interfere with these pilgrims. Some said they were angels. Others, souls in between spirits, tethered not to the earth nor to heaven, but to memory. A few whispered that they were the last echoes of an older priesthood, long forgotten, who walked the earth only in times of great unraveling. They left no footprints, no graves, only silence and direction. The west are always west, to the end of the world, to Finisterre, where the land falls into sea and the sun dies each day in fire and ash. There, it is said, the pilgrims stood at the edge of the cliffs and waited. For what? No one knows. But some believe the quiet pilgrims did not walk the Camino to find Santiago. They walked it to guard it, to ensure that the path would remember that even as the world dimmed, the stars would still point the way, and that, long after the plague had passed, the route would remain not just in stone and step, but in soul, a silver thread between earth and sky, woven not with feet, but with faith, not with words, but with silence. In the mist-cloaked hills of northern England, where the wind carries the cries of gulls inland and the rivers speak in hushed tones, stands Durham, a city of stone, of sanctuary, and of song. Its cathedral rises like a prayer, turned to architecture arches stretching high, ribs of vaulted shadow and light, built to echo the sacred. Within its walls, the air is different, cooler, as if the centuries themselves breathed from the stones, rising with the morning incense and folding the night into peace. Here, the monks had always sung, through war and famine, through feast and frost. The choir of Durham endured. Gregorian chants echoed beneath the ribs of the cathedral, not always from illness but from something else, a quiet forgetting. But in the year of the pestilence, the choir began to dwindle. One by one, voices fell silent. The remaining monks continued to gather in the choir stalls, their hands clasped, their robes whispering against old wood. But their music changed, like the sound of wind brushing harp strings in the dark. Instead, they sang what came to them in dreams. It grew slower. They began to sing in tones unfamiliar to the liturgical tradition, long winding notes that shimmered with dissonance. A visiting abbot from York wrote that the monks no longer followed written chants. It is as if the stones beneath their feet hum, he wrote, and they merely echo the sound. Pilgrims came to hear them, but instead of comfort, they left feeling changed and uncertain whether what they had heard was sacred or something older, deeper. In time, the choir was reduced to a handful of voices, a tambour that wrapped itself around the arches and lingered long after the note ended, and then just one. That the light through the stained glass bent in new ways. That the dust in the air fell upward. Brother Anselm. He was not the oldest, nor the most learned, but his voice held something none could name. He would enter the choir each dawn, stand alone in the center, and sing. Not in Latin, not in English, but in a language that no one recognized, and yet somehow understood. Some claimed that when he sang, the carvings in the cathedral angels' beasts, saints shifted slightly in expression. Then one day he stopped. They discovered that a section of the choir floor had worn thinner than the rest, not from feet, but from pressure, as though something vast and invisible had once stood there, again and again. Anselm did not die. He did not flee. He simply disappeared. His robe was found folded in the center of the choir. Beneath it a single feather, black, tipped in ash, The choir remained silent after that. No one dared take his place, but the memory of his final song lingered. Centuries later, when restorers worked in the cathedral, some nights, the wind through the nave still carries a trace of that forgotten music. Visitors speak of feeling watched, not with eyes, but with listening, as if the cathedral itself waits for the song to return, not for applause, not for praise, but for remembrance, for the sound that once held the world together, even as it fell apart. The stone choir of Durham does not sing aloud anymore, but beneath the surface, in the marrow of the stone, the song remains. Beyond the familiar cities and well-worn roads, across moors swept by bitter wind and veiled in twilight fog, there lay stretches of land unclaimed and no village, no steeple, no bell. The medieval mind called them wastelands, places abandoned by men, and perhaps by Allah too. But even there, life stirred. And during the long winter of the plague, it was in these forsaken places that a new kind of presence appeared. The lantern keepers, they were never seen by day. Each carried a single lantern, glassless, burning with a flame that flickered blue not from oil, but from something colder. Only at dusk, or beneath the ghost light of a waning moon. Figures cloaked in grey, neither tall nor small, walking with a slow and patient rhythm. They left no tracks, and yet their path was always clear. But one exists, a vellum folio bound in birch bark, housed in a forgotten drawer of the Bodleian Library in Oxford, bearing no title, no author, only an ink drawing of a flame, encircled by feathered lines. Where they passed, animals fell silent, but did not flee. Trees bowed slightly, as if in reverence. There are few written accounts of these beings. Within it are brief observations. They do not speak, but they listen. But with dreams they cannot describe. The sick who sleep within their light wake without fever. Families too far from towns to find help would sometimes wake in the night to find one of these lanterns placed near their bed, recorded in a letter to her sister that after her youngest child passed, and in that moment, she says, her sorrow did not vanish but became bearable. She wept alone beside his grave for 3 nights, to the liminal spaces between life and death, between hope and surrender, casting no shadow and no heat, only calm. Children remember them, though their parents never saw. It is said that those lost in the plague years, travelers too weak to continue. A widow from Northumberland, her name now gone to time. On the 4th she saw a lantern glowing just beyond her garden wall, and standing behind it was a figure so still it could have been carved from fog. She approached, a feather sealed beneath the glass in the altar of an abandoned chapel near Whitby. It raised its hand. She slept that night for the first time in weeks. Some speak of seeing a faint blue light, far off, unmoving, and in her dreams, she saw her son walking ahead of her on a path through mist, lanterns lighting the way. When she awoke, her hearth was lit, though she had no firewood left. The lantern keepers did not save cities. They did not stop the plague. They did not preach, nor heal, nor warn. They simply appeared, as if drawn to the edges of things. They never entered towns, never came to courts or cathedrals, but in the silence of the wastelands, they kept watch. And when the pestilence began to wane, when the bells rang again, and markets slowly reawakened, the lanterns vanished, not extinguished, simply gone. Left behind were only traces, circles scorched faintly into stone, bones arranged like compass points. Today, when hikers cross the northern moors and fog thickens to suddenly to be explained, they do not chase it. They simply nod, because some lights are not meant to be reached. They are meant to be remembered. Guides through darkness, keepers of silence, lanterns for the forgotten. In a secluded valley near the Rhine, bordered by whispering forests and shadowed cliffs, lay a monastery once known as Sancta Horatha Holy Hour. It no longer stands, not for its relics or its saints, but for a single object. Its stones were scattered by time, its name erased from most records. But during the plague years it was a place of strange devotion. A bell, not large, nor cast from precious metals, simple but unique. It did not chime with the passing of time. Instead, it rang once each night, but never at the same moment. One evening, it tolled just after sunset. Another, in the dead hush between midnight and dawn. At times, it sounded moments before the first rooster crowed. The monks called it the lost hour, an hour not found on any clock, an hour that slipped between ticks outside the reach of shadow or sun. No one knew who had cast the bell. Its origin was not recorded. Its tone was unlike any other, a low, silvery resonance that seemed to vibrate not just through stone and air, but through memory. When it rang, all activity ceased. The monks would stop mid, not in fear, but in surrender. They would bow their heads and listen, because it was said that during that lost hour, the world remembered the souls forgotten, the names never spoken, the hands never held in farewell. And for the space of that bell's note, time allowed them to be felt again, not as ghosts. His writings, bound in a book stitched with silver thread, were not confessions or scripture, but dreams. but his presence, one young monk named Elia began to transcribe what he experienced each night after the bell tolled. I heard my sister's laughter, though she died 10 winters ago. I smelled juniper and smoked my father's cloak. I saw a doorway of light opening between trees I've never walked among. The bell tolled for 97 nights. They walked with reverence, not just in the chapel, but in the gardens, the kitchens, the fields. Then it stopped, and the monastery changed, not visibly, but inwardly. The monks began to speak more softly. One by one, they stopped using their names, not out of sorrow, but because they felt their names belonged elsewhere, now in the echoes and in the hour. Walking the earth unseen, ringing invisible bells for those who do not even know they are listening. Eventually the monastery emptied. No one fled. No one died. And where, even now, at certain moments, just before dawn, one might hear the faintest chime, they simply left. Some say they wandered into the woods, seeking the source of the bell's sound. Others believe they became something else entirely, keepers of the lost hour. In later centuries, travelers found the valley and marked to the ruins. They found no records, no icons. Only a circle of stone at the center of the chapel floor, where grass refuses to grow. No one knows what time it is when it sounds. But I'll agree it is not part of the day we know. It belongs to the hour that forgets time, and remembers everything else. High upon a crag of weathered stone, where ravens traced circles in the pale sky and the wind keened like a distant hymn, stood the citadel, of a place of governance, of garrisons, of gold. But beneath its proud towers and ancient halls, there lay a chamber not marked on any plan. Even the iron-hearted captains of the fortress began to shudder at the sounds echoing through the courtyard at night. Not screams, nor moans, but the soft pull of thread, the whisper of a shuttle across a loom, not spoken of in court, and not lit by any torch. The chamber of the weaver. The stories begin during the height of the plague, when not rough wool or silk, but something finer silver in hue. It did not break. It coiled itself into a perfect spiral, cool to the touch, and humming faintly when held close to the ear. A loom had appeared, rhythmic, endless. Each morning, a single strand placed at the foot of someone's door. Always the same color, always humming. At first, the guards searched for intruders. Every hallway, every cell, every staircase. They found nothing. But the sound persisted, and then one morning an officer named Tamasha reported finding a thread on his doorstep. It did not fray. A melody that mirrored the rise and fall of breath. That night, he did not sleep. He dreamt of a forest of white trees, each bearing leaves that shimmered like tears. At the base of one tree sat a figure, hooded, faceless, weaving from roots that sang. When he woke, the thread was gone. But beneath the citadel, in a chamber no one remembered building, it stood silent, made of dark wood and bone, though no human hand was seen to carry it in. From that day on, the thread returned. Some feared it, others treasured it. One maid wove it into a hair and found she could remember her mother's voice as clearly as if she spoke beside her. A soldier tied it around his wrist and claimed to dream of every man he had ever killed, offering forgiveness in a language of birth. The archbishop ordered the chamber sealed. But the loom continued to sound, even when walled behind brick and stone. Even when blessed, cursed, and warded, lies a coil of thread unlike any other silver unaging. Silent to all but those who sleep nearby. Those who listened with patience claimed here a pattern in the weaving, a song too old for words. The weaver, it was said, did not speak, did not move, did not sleep, but the threads told stories. Histories not written in ink, but in touch, in memory. Each thread was a life, or perhaps a death, or perhaps both, knotted together into something that would not break. And then, one morning, the thread stopped appearing, not abruptly, simply ceased. No sound from the loom, no strands on thresholds. The chamber, when finally opened, was empty. No weaver, no trace, only a single thread, circling the floor in a perfect spiral. Historians dismissed the tale as legend, an allegory of fate, a monk's metaphor. But in a museum drawer, locked beneath other relics, and they, without fail, dream of trees with roots that whisper, of looms that move without hands, and of a weaver who sits beneath the earth, shaping time itself into a cloth of infinite design, not to control, not to judge, but to remember every name, every silent farewell that passed in plague and prayer, woven now into something eternal. In Bruges, where the canals mirror the stars in the cobbled lanes, wind like veins through a city, the world once held its breath. Bruges was a jewel, even in the Middle Ages, a city of cloth and commerce, of chapels and charters, where the ringing of bells stitched time into gold. Yet, during the plague years, those bells rang less often, and when they did, they rang alone. The plague found Bruges as it did so many cities. It touched its markets and monasteries, its bakers and weavers, where a sexton named Peter claimed to hear voices beneath the floor, its fountains and frescoes. But amid the grief and fear, something quieter took root. It began in the Church of Our Lady, not cries or screams, whispers, gentle, melodic, like wind in reeds. He listened for days before he dared to lift the stones near the choir stalls. Beneath them, in a chamber long sealed, he found something no one expected. Not bones, not tombs, but sleepers, dozens of them, their faces peaceful, their bodies dressed in white, their hands crossed upon their chests, as if in prayer, not embalmed, not decayed, simply sleeping, each on a stone bed carved with patterns no mason recognized, whorls, branches, and stars. Beside each figure lay a small vessel of clay, sealed with wax, etched with a symbol of flame within a circle. The chamber was silent, but not cold. Peter touched one sleeper's hand and recalled it was warm. He fled breathless and told no one until years had passed and the worst had faded. When he finally confessed to a monk, they returned to the site. The chamber was still there, but it was empty, predating even the church, who knew that, in times of great sorrow, the world forgets, and so they chose to sleep, to carry memory into the future. No sleepers, who surrendered themselves to slumber so they might awaken when the world most needed them. No vessels, only faint outlines in the dust. And one thing more, the sound of slow breathing, coming from the stone itself. That chamber beneath Bruges became legend. Some say the sleepers were guardian souls, others believed they were the last of an ancient order. A few whispered that they were not sleeping at all, but dreaming the world into being, that the reality above was not separate from them but shaped by the visions behind their closed eyes. Painters in Bruges began to depict veiled figures sleeping beneath golden fields. Weavers included strange sigils in their tapestries, flame within circle, clay within stone, and poets wrote of the echoing beneath, a phrase found in more than a dozen sonnets of the era. Even today, beneath the churches and cellars of Bruges, strange chambers remain. Some say they're wine vaults, others old cisterns, but those who descend alone speak of warm air, of the scent of beeswax and myrtle, and sometimes, just before sleep, of hearing footsteps where no one walks. The sleepers of Bruges may have risen, or they may have folded their dreams deeper into the stones, but their presence lingers, not as myth, but as a promise, that even in plague, in silence, in death, there are those who remember for us, those who carry light, not in flame, but in dreaming. To the east of Vienna, where the rivers braid through frostbitten plains and the forests begin to whisper in Slavic tongues, stood a small scriptorium known only to a few. It was not grand, not a cathedral library or monastic archive, just a stone house beside a frozen lake, its chimney always smoking, its door always open though few ever entered. This was the dwelling of a reclusive scribe named Marek. He had once copied Bibles for nobles, charters for kings, psalms for monks, but as the Black Death swept through the countryside, Marek withdrew. Not in fear, Marek wrote on sheets of parchment so thin they quivered with breath. His ink was made not from soot or gore, but from crushed petals, river clay, and a strange dust he collected from beneath his floorboards, dust that shimmered, faintly, like powdered pearl. But in silence, he began to write out the words of others, but his own. Each night, by the faint blue light of a single candle, the words he wrote were not linear. They curved, they spiraled, they sang in their shape, like wind caught in loops. A traveler found a bundle of scrolls hidden in a brass vessel beneath a stone slab. At first, no one noticed, but years later, after Marek was gone and his house had long since crumbled into moss and root, subtly as if responding to the reader's thoughts. When opened, the scrolls had not aged. The ink was as fresh as dew, and stranger still, it changed, though she could not recall ever describing it aloud. Each time the scrolls were read, the words shifted slightly, but which brought him to tears. A clever trick of ink and suggestion. One reader, a widow from Brno, claimed to read a poem about a forest she remembered from childhood. Another saw a prayer in a language she had dreamt but never learned. After centuries, the pages would not decay. A soldier read a confession he had never written. The scholars who later studied the scrolls were divided. Some said they were enchanted. Others believed they were a hoax, but no one could explain why, nor why the ink refused to fade. And always, at the bottom of each scroll, Marek had written the same line: "For the one who does not forget." Those who held the scrolls often dreamed of a quiet room, lit only by a single candle, of a man sitting alone, writing without pause, though the world burned outside. In the dreams, the man never looked up, but his pen moved with perfect rhythm, guided not by hand but by heart. It is said that one scroll, when unrolled completely, formed a perfect circle. Its beginning and end met seamlessly, like time folding into itself. Today, some of Marek's scrolls remain in hidden libraries. Others have vanished into private hands. But once in a generation, and those who read them know they were written not to record events, but to preserve essence, to hold the scent of rain on parchment, the echo of breath within syllables, the soul of a world at the edge of forgetting. For not all history lives in books. Some of it waits in ink that cannot fade. for the one who will remember, for the one who will listen. In the foothills of the Pyrenees, veiled by moss-struck pines and surrounded by stones older than roads, there lies a chapel with no name. Its roof is bowed, its windows bare, and ivy drapes it like mourning cloth. No map points to it, no records mention it. And yet, shepherds, monks, and wanderers have all passed by it somehow without truly noticing, until they need to. For this chapel faces no direction. Its door does not point to east as tradition commands. Its altar does not align with the sunrise or the stars. It simply exists, unfixed, as if it had grown from the earth itself, not built by hands but by memory, by longing, by the pull of something sacred and unnamed. During the plague years, when villages vanished overnight and the fields lay empty of prayer, stories emerged of travelers who, overcome with despair, found themselves before this chapel's quiet threshold. They had not sought it. It felt like moonlight, but bore the warmth of flame. Dust danced in the air like snow, and the floor was made of hundreds, perhaps thousands of stones, each etched with a name. But it found them, and when they entered, they found not pews or statues or saints, only silence and light, soft, ambient light that seemed to have no source. No two stones were alike, no two names repeated, others in languages lost. Some were simple initials, some were symbols, some were in Latin, but all were names, and none belonged to the living. The chapel, it seemed, was a place of resting memory, not a graveyard, not a shrine, but a vessel, like a lullaby you've never heard, yet somehow recall, a place where the essence of those lost to plague whose families could not bury them. Her name was etched on a stone beside my resting place. I do not know who she was, but she lives within me now, whose names were not carved in wood or stone could be held, not mourned, not praised, simply remembered. Pilgrims who spent a night within the chapel often awoke changed, not healed, not enlightened, but softened. One man wrote, "I wept for a woman I never knew." A nun who once wandered there in her old age claimed the chapel whispered as she slept, not in words but in sensation, like wind across skin. And always, she said, she dreamt of people walking in a quiet procession, carrying candles with flames that did not flicker. She never saw their faces, but each held a stone. And as they walked, they gently placed the stones down, one by one, at the center of the chapel, the heart of memory, the source of stillness. Over time, the stories faded, as stories do. The chapel was forgotten by those who charted the land. But in moments of deep grief, in the twilight between breath and surrender, some claim the chapel reappears, for those who carry loss, for those who do not seek answers, but who are willing to sit in silence, facing no direction at all, and feel the weight of names never spoken, held gently by stone and silence. On the western coast of Ireland, where the cliffs fall steep into the sea and the wind howls as though it carries the cries of forgotten saints, there once stood a convent wrapped in salt and shadow. They did not beg or teach or preach. It was small, barely more than a cluster of stone cells in a narrow chapel facing the grey Atlantic. The sisters who lived there belonged to an obscure order devoted to Saint Brigitte. They were not numerous. The candle was said to have been burning for 300 years. Its flame was not tall, not bright, but steady. They tended one thing, a single candle, kept within a recessed alcove in the chapel wall, behind glass so worn it wept dew. Even when wind screamed through the mortar cracks, the candle did not flicker. Unyielding even when storms battered the coast, the sisters spoke of it only in whispers. She burns so the lost are not. She keeps vigil for what the world forgets. But during the plague years something changed. The light of the flame began to pulse, not in warning, but in rhythm. They simply stood beside the flame, watching it. A slow breath, inhale, pause, exhale, as if the candle itself were listening, feeling, and one by one, the sisters began to have dreams. He wept, not from grief but from remembering. Dreams of people they did not know, faces marked not by sickness but by longing, eyes filled not with fear but with silence. These dream visitors never spoke, waiting. The abbess, an old woman with a voice like wool, recorded these visions in a slim journal. The entries were simple, poetic. A child stood beside the flame and touched her own shadow. A man with hands of ash knelt. The sea sang tonight. The candle pulsed in time. As the pestilence swept through the nearby villages, the sisters remained untouched. But they no longer sang aloud. Drawn by a letter she claimed had arrived without signature, they kept silent vigil in the chapel, kneeling before the flame. Each night, one sister would keep watch until dawn, her eyes never leaving the slow, breathing glow. And then, one morning, the abbess did not wake, nor the next sister, nor the next. Within a fortnight all the sisters had passed, not from plague, not from cold, but as if their part had ended. Too bright for moonlight, too steady for fire. Say they have dreamed of a chapel lit by one eternal candle. They were found in positions of peace, hands folded, eyes closed, faces turned gently toward the flame. The last sister, young and unknown to the others, arrived weeks later. She entered the chapel. She found the candles still burning, the air still pulsing. She buried the sisters beneath the earth, marking their graves with stones from the sea, each inscribed with a single spiral. And then she took her place by the flame. No one has seen her since. But from time to time, sailors off the coast of Clare claim to see a glow upon the cliff's edge, and a few, when lost in storm or sorrow, a candle that breathes with them, that sees without eyes, that remembers what even time forgets. It is said the flame of St. Brigitte's candle will never die, not because it is protected, but because it is not alone. It burns with the memories of all who have passed and seen. It burns with the silence between names. It burns with the quiet truth that even in darkness there are lights that do not ask to be found, only to be felt. Beyond the borders of any known parish, far from the roads lined with crosses and milestones, there is said to have been a garden, not marked on maps, not spoken of in sermons, but known to those who wandered too long, who grieved too deeply, who listened too closely to the silence left in the wake of the Black Death. It was called, in whispers only, the Widow's Garden. They say it belonged to no one, and yet was tended by one woman always seen in a black shawl, her hair like frost, her eyes like still water before a storm. No one knew her name. No one remembered seeing her arrive. Snowdrops in the heat of July. But when they stumbled into her garden, most often when lost in the fog or fleeing despair, she would greet them with a soft nod and no words. The garden itself was unlike any other. Flowers bloomed out of season, lavender in winter. There were herbs known to heal and some known to forget. Fruit trees bore no seed, and vines wrapped themselves around visitors' legs like old friends, in the visitor's own hand, in a language they could read even if they had never seen it before. And always, at the center of the garden, was a stone table. Shadows would stretch like roots across the ground, and the widow would return with a bowl of water, into which a single tear would fall, hers or the visitor's. No one could tell. Names left behind, loves never mourned, children never born. Upon it, a book bound in bark blank, until one sat before it. Then quietly, slowly, words would appear. These were not words written by choice, tending the roots of plants that whispered in forgotten dialects, their leaves rustling with names no longer spoken aloud. They were truths drawn out like breath, confessions unspoken, and as the visitor read their own forgotten truths, the garden would shimmer, light would fall in strange ways. Then the words in the book would fade, and the visitor would find themselves outside the garden, on a road they did not know but which always led home. No one could ever find the garden twice, but those who had seen it bore a change, not healed, not joyful, but softened. A few have walked for years, guided only by dreams, as if the edges of grief had been made round, like riverstones, and in dreams they often saw the widow again. It is said that she had once loved a plague victim, and that, in her sorrow, she planted a single seed, a seed watered with memory, and from it the garden grew, not with purpose, not with plan, but with a rhythm deeper than mourning, a space not for curing but for remembering and forgiving. Many have tried to find the garden again. Some have searched maps, others have prayed, but the garden appears only when it chooses, only when the heart is ready to listen, not for answers, but for echoes. And always, the visitor leaves one thing behind, a part of their sorrow, planted like a seed, left in silence, to bloom for someone else, someday, who will also come carrying more memory than breath. Among the chalk cliffs of Normandy, where seabirds trace forgotten alphabets in the air and the tides carve runes into stone, villagers once spoke of a peculiar wind. It did not come often, but when it did, the world changed. It was no louder than a whisper, yet it filled the ears like a choir, but measured, precise words. In Latin, those who heard it said it carried syllables, not the howling of storms, not shouted, speaking from behind the veil of sleep, but sung, soft, flowing phrases, spoken with a voice that seemed both far away and impossibly close, like a memory of someone long gone. Scholars dismissed it as imagination, as echoes of distant abbeys carried by storm drafts, warped by the cliffs. But the villagers knew better. They called it the Sibylle, the singing wind. During the plague years it came more frequently, always at dusk, always when the horizon burned with soft gold. Who wandered the cliff top chasing gulls and returned pale and silent. She would not speak for 3 days. It came in the wind, it wanted me to know. The first to speak of it was a child nameless. Then, one morning, she rose and recited a full mean perfect Latin. Her family, unlearned and poor, had never taught her such things. When asked where she had heard it, she only replied. After that, others began to listen more closely. Fishermen paused mid, saying the wind spoke the creed as it had been recited 1,000 years before, in a dialect no longer used. Shepherds stilled their flocks. Old women leaned from windows, their eyes clouded but unblinking. Some claimed they heard prayers, accompanied by no instruments, no choir, and no echo. One man, a widower, said the wind whispered the last words of his wife, who had died alone. A blind monk, traveling from Rouen, fell to his knees on the cliffs and wept. And only once a group of pilgrims walking north heard a full hymn carried in the wind as breath. They all dreamt of a cathedral made of clouds that night. In later years, when the plague had loosened its grip, the singing wind became rarer. But when it came, it was never forgotten. And always, it brought something unasked for but needed comfort, clarity, closure. There are few records of it now. Just fragments in weather logs, marginalia and notes scribbled by wandering monks in the corners of illuminated texts. The wind said, "You are not alone." The wind remembered what we forgot. In the wind, there was no time, only presence. Today, those cliffs are still walked by one. Few listen for the wind. Fewer still understand what it carries. But on the rarest evenings, when the sea sighs and the world grows thin, a voice may still rise on the air, not to answer, but to sing, in a language that once crowned kings and buried saints. A language not dead but dreaming, carried by a wind that remembers the names carved not in stone but in soul. Far to the south, beyond the dark ridges of the Balkans and the scattered ruins of forgotten gods, lay the forested heart of Thessaly, a place older than empire, older than iron. Nestled between mountains veiled in perpetual mist, stood a hermitage long abandoned. Its walls, once whitewashed with lime and prayer, were now overgrown with ivy and silence. No icons adorned its chapel, no candles lit its halls. And yet, in its innermost room there was a mirror, a circle of polished ashwood, smooth as glass, framed by a ring of carved leaves, vines, and one strange motif repeated, a feather falling upward. The villagers of the valley below had long whispered of it. They said the mirror did not reflect the face it showed, what waited behind the face. Not a soul, exactly. She did not seek healing. She sought silence, an end to noise, to memory, to the weight of mourning. But the story that Saul had forgotten. During the height of the Black Death, a woman named Durham, having lost her husband and 3 sons to the sickness, wandered into the mountains. She stumbled upon the hermitage after 3 days without speech. Inside, she found the mirror. Drawn by instinct more than curiosity, she stepped before it, and what she saw made her fall to her knees. Not her face, not the sorrow she knew, the evening sun casting their shadows long and warm upon the wall, but a moment barely remembered of laughter, of her youngest child chasing fireflies in the garden, his small hand in hers, the scent of crushed basil. She wept, and when she rose, the mirror was dark. That night, she slept in the hermitage, curled beneath an old cloak. She dreamed of doors opening into sky, of hands reaching down, not to save, but to remember with her. When she awoke, she left a single hairpin before the mirror, and returned to the village, changed, not healed, but lighter. In the years that followed, others came, never in crowds, never by invitation, just those who had carried their sorrow beyond the threshold of words, pointing at the mirror and saying a name no one recognized but which brought his grandmother to tears. Each stood before the mirror. Each saw something different. Not always joyful, but always true. One man saw the face of a stranger he had passed years ago in the street, someone he had chosen not to help. Another saw the moment his mother died, not as it happened, but from behind her eyes. One child, who had never spoken, laughed aloud for the first time. And always, after the vision faded, the mirror grew dark again, accepting no more until it was ready. Never cold, just waiting and listening. Eventually, a monk sealed the hermitage, fearing the power within. He carved prayers into the lintel, buried the entrance beneath stone. But to this day shepherds speak of a wind that carries the scent of ashwood and candle wax. And sometimes, those who walk alone in grief find themselves before a clearing they do not remember climbing to. A door that was not there a moment before, and within light without flame. And a mirror that shows no face, only memory. Only the truth behind the sorrow, only the story waiting to be seen. Not to judge, not to erase, but to hold, in silence, as if to say, this too was real. This too matters. This too shall be remembered. In the northern port city of Tallinn, where the sea speaks in frost and the rooftops steep like folded wings against the sky, there was once a loom that never stopped weaving. It stood in a small room at the top of a crooked house overlooking the harbor, visible only in certain light, at certain hours, to certain eyes. The house belonged to an old weaver named Erie. She had no family, no apprentices, no ledger of trade. Her door remained closed, her shutters always drawn. But each morning, as the bells of the city chimed the first hour, the sound of weaving began. Not hurried, not rhythmic, but slow. Sailors believed it protected their ships. Mothers brought their children past the house when they were sick, hoping the echo of that quiet weaving would draw out the fever. Thoughtful, as if the loom were listening as much as moving, the people of Tallinn grew used to the sound, blessing doors and burning incense. The loom did not stop. No one ever saw Erie, until the plague arrived, when the first black-cloaked priests walked the city's narrow streets, not sound, but understanding. But for death the loom continued. When the marketplaces emptied and the sea winds grew quiet, the loom did not stop, whose cradle had remained empty since the plague's first wave, when the bells rang not for prayer. And then, one evening, the sound changed. The rhythm faltered, the weft caught, the silence stretched. Neighbors gathered outside the crooked house, uncertain, afraid, and from within came not a voice, but a whisper rising and falling like waves. It was not language. Those who stood closest felt it, memories not their own blooming inside their chest. One felt the weight of a mother's hand from a century past. Another saw a lantern swinging in a foggy alley, its light never dimming. A child cried, not from fear, but from knowing the name of a sibling they had never met, wrapping themselves through the room, out the windows, over the rooftops. And then the loom resumed, but it no longer wove thread. It wove light. Soft threads of golden mist drifted from its arms. They did not burn, did not blind. They simply illuminated what had been hidden. They may hear the sound of a shuttle gliding through something unseen. For one night, Talon remembered everyone it had lost, not through name or grave, but through presence. Every window flickered with a warmth that came from no fire. Every bell tower told once not in sorrow, but in recognition. Silence. When morning came, the house was empty. No sign of Erie. Only a single strand of golden thread caught on the edge of the windowsill, humming faintly in the wind. To this day it is said that Talon remains protected. No fire has touched its heart since. Its old town endures, its spires untouched. And on the coldest nights, if one walks the harbor alone, a loom that weaves not cloth, but memory. Not for fashion, not for sale, but for keeping the soul of a city alive, in every silent stitch, in every unseen pattern, in the gentle knowing that what was lost is never truly gone, only woven into the fabric of what still is. At the edge of where the Rhine turns its thoughts toward the north and the rooftops lean like eavesdropping listeners, there once stood a tower with no name, not part of the city's fortifications, not a church, just a single spire of stone, quiet and alone. And at its peak, behind windows dusted with ash, ticked a clock unlike any other. Its hands did not move forward. They moved backward, not in haste, not in panic, but as it returned, but in calm, deliberate reversal, marking time not as it passed. Each tick a memory, each turn a retreat from the now. Whose wife succumbed to the first wave of plague in silence, her eyes fixed not on heaven, but on their wedding ring, held in her palm. It was built, the stories say, by a man called Johannes, once a master. Johannes climbed the tower and did not come down for 30 years. After burying her with no one to witness, when the city finally remembered him, they sent a delegation to investigate. They found the tower clean, swept, and utterly still. And at its center, the clock, wound by no visible gears, powered by no fire or water, yet moving, and not in the direction known to man. When questioned, Johann spoke only one phrase, of laughter once shared in the amber light of early evening. I am unwinding the sorrow. Each hour that passed backward, they say, peeled away a layer of time. Who had died in infancy, and had never been spoken aloud again. The present became less sharp, the grief less heavy. The air within the tower held the scent of summers long gone, of bread once baked, and the longer one remained. The more memories returned, ones not known by the visitor, but somehow carried in their bones. A priest stepped inside and recalled the name of his brother. A baker wept, remembering the warmth of her mother's hands, though she had died when she was 2. A blind woman saw a light soft and silver on, described, in perfect detail, his hand resting on the backwards hour. A tree she used to climb, though she had never spoken of it before. Time, in the tower, did not heal, it reminded. Not with cruelty, but with care, as though the clock did not measure seconds, but silences, did not chime hours, but heartbeats missed. Eventually Johannes passed away. He was found beside the clock, smiling faintly. The city debated what to do with the tower, but when they tried to remove the clock, its ticking ceased, not with violence, but with finality. A hush. And so, they left it, sealed the door, let moss gather on the stones, let the rain speak to the gears. Today few know of the tower. Its face is worn, its hands rusted, but when the wind rises from the north and the sky burns blue before storm, some say you can hear it. A tick, and then another, not forward, but gently backward. A reminder that time does not only carry us onward, sometimes it returns, to the forgotten warmth, to the whispered goodbye, to the moment the world still breathed, just before the page turned. And perhaps that is where memory lives, not ahead, but in the quiet turning back, on the edge of the Tyrolean Alps, where the peaks cut the sky like ancient blades and the valleys cradled villages like whispers in the hand of Allah. There once stood an abbey carved into the mountainside. Its name is lost to time, but the people who lived in the valley below called it Sancta Vox, the Holy Voice. Its monks were known not for their sermons or but for their choir, a sound that drew pilgrims from beyond the snows, past the cold rivers, through forests of beech and pine. Voices so pure, it was said that even the wind paused to listen. Their chants were not of earthly things, not hymns to saints or kings, but songs of memory, of skies that remembered the stars, of rivers that remembered the first rain, of souls that remembered being held. The monks sang each morning as the light poured through the frost-glass windows, casting soft rainbows across their robes, and again each night, as the sun slipped behind the jagged teeth of the mountains, and the wolves began their song from the ridges above. But when the Black Death came, it came swift. The snow had only just melted when the first monk fell. They buried him in silence. But the next day, when the choir gathered to sing the morning hymn, his voice returned, clear, resonant. No one panicked. They simply sang with him. The next week, another passed, and another voice joined the choir. One by one, the monks fell, but one by one, their voices remained, unseen, yet unmistakable, stronger than ever. The abbot, Father Lenz, wrote in his journal, "It is not death we fear, but the forgetting. And here, in this place, we are remembered by song." When the last living monk closed his eyes, it is said that the mountains themselves echoed with music. No breath, no bodies, only harmony. Pilgrims continued to come. They found the abbey empty, dust falling like snow through the nave. But each morning and each night, the choir still sang. No shadows, just sound. Perfect. He sent a group of men to silence the abbey, to sanctify the stones, to banish what could not be explained. Unshaken, the Bishop of Innsbruck, upon hearing the tale, declared it heresy. They climbed the mountain. They heard the music. We heard the laughter of friends we buried. We heard ourselves, and none of them ever returned. Only a folded note was found days later, pinned beneath a rock near the pass. We heard our mother's voices in the chords. Over the centuries, Sanctavox crumbled. Avalanche took half its roof. Moss claimed its walls. Yet the choir continued. To this day, if you walk the old trail in winter, just as the dusk fades into indigo, you may hear it. A song without origin, without end. It does not beg for attention, it does not grieve. It simply is. Sound carried by devotion. Memory made melody. Voices that refuse to fall silent. For death may take the body, but memory, when sung, when truly sung, will echo long after the last breath, into the stone, into the wind, into the soul of the world. In the low wetlands of where reeds sway like silent sentinels and the earth drinks the sky's reflection, there once stood a lantern. It hung from no pole, rested on no table. It simply hovered near the edge of the marsh paths where fog settles thick as wool and frogs sing like ancient bells. The lantern glowed with a soft, steady light, neither flame nor oil, but something older. The people who lived near the salt flats knew of it. They called it La Valusta Watcher. It was not feared. It was respected. They said it appeared only to the lonely, only to the wandering, only to those who had forgotten what they had once set out to find. During the years when the plague hollowed their homes and silenced their marketplaces, the lantern became more frequent. It hovered near doorways where prayers had ceased, floated beside the boats of fishermen who had lost their kin, waited on narrow paths where widows wandered in search of answers they could not name. Always glowing, never wavering, and always just far enough away to be followed, but never reached. One night a healer named Morel, grief-stricken and near death herself, followed the lantern deep into the marsh. She walked for hours, the mist thickening around her, the world falling away. She found herself beside a tree she had never seen, its bark like silver, its roots tangled in silence. The lantern stopped. Hung above the roots, and beneath it sat a single clay bowl. Inside, a dark liquid, still and cool, smelling faintly of rain. Without knowing why Mira drank, she did not wake the next day, nor the next. But when she returned to her village weeks later, her eyes were different. She no longer carried her walking stick. Her hands no longer trembled. She remembered things that had never happened, or perhaps had not yet. She wrote only once of what she saw. I drank the night, I saw the world through its eyes. It does not forget. It does not forgive. It simply holds. Others followed the lantern after her. Some returned, some did not. But those who came back all carried something unseen. They spoke more gently, touched the earth more softly, and in their presence, others wept without knowing why. It is said the lantern does not guide to healing or salvation. It guides to stillness, to the place beneath memory, to the moment before language, to the edge where sorrow and peace become indistinguishable. Today, the marshes of Camargue remain wild. The wind still carries salt. The birds still cry across the flooded reeds. And some nights, just beyond the last trail post, a light flickers not by hand, nor electricity, but by the breath of memory itself. And if you follow it, do so slowly, not with hope, not with fear, but with reverence, for the lantern does not promise answers, only presence, and a quiet place to set your grief down, like a stone in shallow water, held remembered. And finally, light. In a small village tucked within the hills of Bohemia, where the clouds sleep low and the trees seem always to listen, there was once a stone wall that bore no markings, no carvings, no ivy, no offerings, just one name. But it did not remain. It changed. With every storm, when the rains fell, the name would appear. It became a quiet place of pilgrimage, written across the face of the stone in dark water, as if the drops had memory and intention. Not painted, not etched, just present visible only when the sky wept. The villagers called it Selza, the stone that cries. And during the plague years, when grief outnumbered the living, the first name that appeared was Marta, no surname. No date, just martyred in droplets that clung to the stone like dew. A young farmer had just buried his wife of that name, and when he saw it, he fell to his knees. He returned the next day with a bundle of rosemary. By then, the name had vanished, and another had taken its place, standing before the stone with hands open, not praying, not pleading, just listening. Alexei, then Lucia, then Benedictus. The names came as rain did, never on demand, always with grace, and never the same twice. Some villagers began to visit in silence whenever a storm neared, waiting, and sometimes they saw a name they had not spoken in years. To paint over its surface, a sister lost in childhood, a neighbor whose memory had faded, a midwife who had died with no kin to mourn her. Her name bloomed across the stone in a spring drizzle that left the trees weeping for hours. The church grew wary. They sent a priest to sanctify the wall, to scrub it. Not yet, when her own name appeared faintly at the base of the wall only for a moment, before fading into mist. But the rain returned, and with it, the names. Even the priest, in time, came to visit not as a skeptic, but as a mourner, for when his own mother passed, no one ever touched the wall. It was not forbidden. It simply felt sacred, a thing too close to truth to require ceremony. One old woman, who had lived through the plague and had outlived every member of her family, visited the stone each rain for decades. She kept no journals, spoke little. A single stone remains darker than the rest smooth, unchanged by moss or wind. But one day, a child saw her smile and whisper. And then, on the day of her passing, the village rain came not from clouds, but from mist rising from the ground. The stone remained dry until twilight. And then, for the first time, the wall bore a full sentence. All are remembered here. After that, the names returned. But not just from that village. Names from faraway lands. Names in strange alphabets. Names spoken only in dreams. To this day, when the rain falls on certain hills in Bohemia, and if you stand there, in stillness, and watch the water move, you may see something written in the droplets. Not in ink, but in memory. A name you have not spoken aloud. A name you carry in your bones. A name that does not ask to be shouted or carved, only to be known. Only to be seen once more, as the world weeps gently for those it never forgot. In the dense forests of the Ardennes, where mist lingers like a forgotten vow and the moss grows thick enough to muffle footsteps, there exists a bridge no map has ever charted. It arches over no river, spans no chasm, connects no road. Simply they're half hidden between the birches and the slow-twisting roots. Its stones slick with time, its railings etched with symbols long weathered to whispers. The villagers of the nearby hamlet called it La Ponte d'una Luther Bridge to Noah, and they warned children not to play near it, not out of danger, but out of reverence. For the bridge did not take you to any place. It took you to any. They said it only appeared after a heavy fog, during a rare hush that blanketed even the birdsong. During the plague years, that hush came more often, and so did the bridge, drawn to the curve of its arch like moths to an unlit flame. Wanderers half mad with grief spoke of stumbling upon it in the dark. Some crossed it, some didn't, but those who did never spoke of what they saw on the other side, except one, an old miller, whose name has long since disappeared, returned after 3 days walking. He was barefoot, pale, his eyes wide with a silence too large for words. He said only, "It showed me the moment I forgot to forgive." After that he sat each morning by the edge of the woods, whispering to the leaves. Others followed, a mother who had lost her 3 children, a midwife who could no longer sleep, a monk who had ceased to pray. They found the bridge, and they returned, changed, never healed, but softened, hollowed, humbled. They no longer feared death. They no longer clung to names. They simply listened more, to the wind, to the stillness between raindrops, to the heartbeat of the earth itself. It was said that if you crossed the bridge, you might see a memory you had buried, not to relive it, not to rewrite it, but to witness it again, fully, with no shield. And in doing so, part of you would be not replaced but redrawn. as if your story had been inked too quickly the first time. The stone glistens with morning dew that smells faintly of myrrh and rain. Some who stood at the edge of the bridge wept and turned away. Others crossed and never returned, but all agreed the bridge judged no one. Some hikers in the Arden report a strange feeling as though they've already arrived somewhere they have not yet begun to go. It's simply reflected, and sometimes, when the moon is low and the trees hold their breath, today, no one knows exactly where the bridge lies. Its location shifts, like a dream forgotten upon waking. But in moments of deep silence, and in the clearing ahead, mist curling like the edge of a turning page, they sometimes glimpse the arch of stone, waiting, patient, unchanged. The bridge to nowhere, which is also the bridge to all things remembered, to the moment before the choice, to the name you never spoke, to the forgiveness you never knew you were seeking. And beyond it, not a destination, but a truth, carried in silence, and laid gently across your shoulders, like a cloak made of everything you left behind. In the farthest reaches of the Iberian hills, beyond the olive groves and the limestone caves where shepherds whisper to silence, there is a stretch of land where nothing grows, not a tree, not a vine, not even moss, just dust, as though breathing in rhythm with something ancient beneath the surface, fine as flour, pale as bone, and always shifting. The locals call it El Sueño del Povoza, and during the long shadows of the plague, when villages dimmed like forgotten candles and bells no longer rang for the dead, this dust began to move. Not with wind, but with purpose. People spoke of waking to find strange patterns etched into the dust outside their doors. Spirals, waves, circles surrounding footprints that did not lead in or out. One farmer, half mad with fever, claimed he saw the dust rise into the air and form the outline of a woman, arms open, eyes closed, as if dreaming while standing. When he blinked, she was gone, their feet making no sound, their thoughts heard before they could be spoken. But her shape remained for days, like a shadow burned into the earth. Others described dreams more vivid than waking life dreams, where they walked through vast fields of dust beneath an indigo sky. They would meet others, their loved ones lost, strangers with familiar eyes, children not yet born. And always, always, a voice would speak not with words, but with understanding. You are not alone here. A wandering mystic named Iro built a hut at the edge of the dreaming dust. She spoke to no one, slow melodies that seemed to rise from the earth itself. But every morning, she scattered petals into the soil and sang songs in a language no one recognized. Villagers left gifts for her, candles, bread, letters they could not bring themselves to send. One night the dust moved again, curling upward like smoke, spiraling into the sky in a column of light. Those who saw it felt their bones hum. The next day, Iro was gone, but in the center of the dust, they found a bowl of clear water, floating on its surface. The petals she had once scattered, unwilted, unchanged, and in the reflection of the bowl, some swore they saw their own face, but a younger old or not their own at all. Since then, the dust remains. It never thickens, never blows away, and those who sleep near it dream deeply, not of stories or symbols, but of stillness, of being known completely, of every forgotten heartbeat echoing once more through the quiet fabric of time. Scientists once tried to collect samples, but the dust refused to be carried. It slipped through fingers, vanished from glass. It returned to its home. Some believe the dust holds the memory of every soul lost to the Black Death, not their suffering, but their final breath, the shape of their last thought, the color of their unspoken word, held in silence, in warmth, in dream. Today a single stone marks the edge of the dreaming dust. It bears no inscription, only a small spiral carved with a fingertip, and when the wind passes across it just right, it does not scatter. It sings a note so low it can't be heard, only felt, in the chest, in the blood, in the part of you that remembers things you never learned, and loves people you never met. The dust that dreams does not call, does not demand, it simply waits, and when the moment comes, it will show you not who you were, or who you are, but the quiet truth that lingers behind all stories, that nothing truly vanishes, that all is held, even the dust, especially the dust. And now, dear dreamer, let the final echoes fade like mist from a morning field. We have wandered through hidden gardens and bridges that cross nothing and everything. We have walked beside monks who sing beyond breath, seen names written in rain, and touched the silence that lives beneath time itself. What you have heard tonight are not tales of horror, but of memory, and loss was folded gently into song, stone, and sky, not warnings, but whispers, echoes from a world that once wept quietly where sorrow bloomed into symbols. The Black Death was not only a shadow upon the body, but a turning of the soul, a moment when the veil thinned and the world remembered how to feel, deeply, fully, in silence. If these ancient murmurs have stirred something within you, a quiet knowing, a forgotten breath, then let your presence be felt in the stillness. Gently offer a light to mark your place in the dreaming, and if your soul seeks more of these journeys beyond history's edge, Subscribe and join our circle of listening hearts, our community of quiet travelers who drift together through time's forgotten corridors. Tell us, if you wish, where you listen from which part of the sleeping world you drift into these whispered realms. Let us draw a constellation of dreamers across the globe, each of us held gently beneath the same stars, guided by the same longing to remember, to understand, and to rest. Sleep now. Let your thoughts become leaves. Let your breath be a bell tower in the fog. Let the world turn gently without you for a while. And know, as you descend into the deep, that you are not forgotten. Not by time. Not by story. We will meet again, where memory lingers beneath the hush of history. Good night, dreamer. Sleep well.